On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Canada has long been committed to a two-state solution, an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. For decades, it was hoped that this outcome would be achieved as part of a peace process built around a negotiated settlement between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. Regrettably, this approach is no longer tenable.
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney in Ottawa Wednesday, announcing Canada is moving to recognize the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly meets in New York in about 6 weeks from now, after Labor Day. Carney said he had to take the step because Canada wants to help lead international efforts to secure lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. And right now, he says, the prospect for this was quickly slipping away, what with the threat of Hamas still wanting to use terror to destroy Israel after October 7th, which he called a heinous terrorist attack. But he also blamed Israel's government for not only allowing a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but also pushing for more settlements, protecting extremist settlers who attacked Palestinians on the West Bank, and, in recent days, the Knesset passing a non-binding motion to annex the West Bank, land which Canada considers Israel has been illegally occupying for decades. Canada still wants Hamas to give back the hostages immediately and disarm, but that wasn't part of the main deal which Carney made this week with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in what's been described as a lengthy and warm phone call. That deal has 3 conditions: to hold elections in 2025 without Hamas at all involved, to reform the Palestinian system of government, and to demilitarize. And to sweeten the pot, Canada is giving the Palestinian Authority another $10 million for governance reform, on top of about $350 million in aid granted to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza since October 7th. Canada's Jewish mainstream groups like B'nai B'rith and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs were alarmed by Carney's decision, calling it dangerously premature and skeptical that Mahmoud Abbas can be trusted. Others are calling it appeasement of terrorism and a massive victory for Hamas, who, at last report, have now cut off peace negotiations in Qatar over the food situation in Gaza. But Carney's move is being welcomed by progressive Jewish Canadian leaders from J-Space Canada and Canadian Friends of Peace Now, among others, calling it courageous, as a two-state solution also guarantees the long-term safety of Israel.
And by recognizing Palestine, we're doing a few things. We're giving hope to Palestinians that it's not lost, that despite your horrible conditions in both the West Bank and Gaza right now, we're sending a signal to you, get your act together.
So in effect, what Canada is doing is not changing anything on the ground, is rewarding terror, and Canada's moral and diplomatic clarity is weakened.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Friday, August 1st, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Canada's recognition of Palestine has made headlines around the world. Israel's government has slammed the move, while U.S. President Donald Trump said Canada's elbows-up move, which is not in sync with the U.S. position, will make reaching our own bilateral trade deal between Ottawa and Washington even more difficult. And just hours later on Thursday, the U.S. State Department slapped sanctions on the Palestinian Authority and the PLO's leaders, although they didn't give out names, but pointed out they continue to support terrorism, especially in their schools, and pay families of terrorists who killed Jews. Among other ways, they continue to foment terrorism globally and at UN world courts. The whole thing is such a fraud issue, so we're bringing you two of Canada's top experts on global affairs and international law to explain why Canada did it. You won't want to miss Alan Kessel. He was a Canadian ambassador and a legal advisor to Global Affairs Canada for many years, just retired after a 40-year career in diplomacy. He's coming up later in our episode, and he's diametrically opposed to our first guest's view. John Allen was Canada's ambassador to Israel from 2006 to 2010 under the Harper administration. He's long been critical of Israel. He's now with the Munk School of Global Affairs at the U of T. He joins me now from Toronto.
Thanks for having me.
Recently, on another media outlet, CBC, when they asked you about the United Kingdom's announcement that it would recognize Palestine if Israel doesn't stop the war and let food aid in, I understood your answer to say that that was kind of the wrong approach, that it was used like as a stick. First of all, tell me if I understood you right, and then explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, I thought it was a completely bizarre set of conditions. When you decide to recognize a state for whatever reason, you do that for reasons related to that state or because of the political situation that exists. You may be wanting to send a signal, but you don't put conditions on another state and use it as a stick and say that you're only going to recognize the second state if that first state does X, Y, and Z. That first state, Israel in this case, may or may not agree to a ceasefire, will not agree to begin a pathway to a Palestinian state. So, frankly, the UK will recognize Palestine in September at the General Assembly, but a very strange set of conditions. In Canada's case, in contrast, there were a set of conditions, and I think we should make it clear. These were not conditions in the sense that unless they're met, Canada is not going to recognize. Canada is recognizing a Palestinian state in September. A number of the conditions that the Prime Minister mentioned have already been met. The Gulf states and President Abbas have acknowledged the horrors of October 7, have demanded the hostages be released. They have already ended the pay for
Slay.
when terrorists are convicted and their families are given money. That's already ended. The questions of elections within a year are obviously not going to happen before September. So it's clear that that's not a precondition to this. And the fact that Hamas will not be a part of those elections, those are all things that will happen. But they have been committed to by Abbas. And frankly, the other Gulf states have joined in.
Which didn't get a lot of attention in the last few days, but that's a big story that came out Monday and Tuesday. But it's really important for you to bring it up.
Including Turkey, UAE and Qatar and Saudi, of course, but Turkey, whose relations with Israel are pretty bad right now. But you're right, that is very important. And the fact that they have all agreed that Hamas will not be a participant in the elections or in the governance of a Palestine going forward, or the governance of the Gaza Strip, if that for a period has to be separated out.
You say, okay, Hamas can't have a part. How can there be democratic free elections when many observers are saying Hamas is going to make it difficult for people to get to the polls? They're going to, they kicked PA out of Gaza. There's a lot of support for Hamas in the West Bank. And
there's not going to be elections in Gaza. These elections are in the West Bank for the Palestinian Authority.
Full stop.
Until you can end the chaos, bring rule of law, bring a military force from the Gulf supported by the West, and begin massive humanitarian aid, you can't hold elections in Gaza. And that wasn't what was intended. It should have been made more clear. And we've talked about a technocratic government going into Gaza as a first step, but not an elected government.
Why do you think Canada made this move? And I'll just preface it because our listeners may have seen this. A few days earlier, Anita Anand and the government was saying, well, we're not going to do anything. And then, They changed their mind very quickly in 1 week.
He blamed Hamas for what it's done. He blamed Hamas for what it's doing. He didn't put all the blame on Israel. What he did say is that the actions of the government right now, passing a resolution in the Knesset that says no Palestinian state, expanding settlements, allowing for settler violence, having two ministers in the government talking about resettling Gaza, all of those, and a prime minister who said 2 weeks ago at the White House at a dinner in front of the press that he does not believe in a Palestinian state and will never negotiate one. All of those things together, plus what's going on in Gaza, have sent a signal to the international community writ large that the two states are threatened right now, that the possibility of these two people, 7.5 million Jews and 7.5 million Palestinians, living together in peace in that region is now being threatened. And there is a possibility that we will be in constant conflict going forward because the 7.5 million Palestinians are not going to be occupied without some kind of response forever. So, what the international community is basically saying is we have to try and do what we can to preserve the possibility of two states. Get good governance, have elections, get ready to be the state that you want to be, and we will support you. And they're sending a signal to Israel to say, listen, two states for two peoples has been our policy, and frankly, it was your policy for decades. And we now are fearful that that possibility is disappearing. And we're going to try and preserve it until Donald Trump's out of the White House, Bibi Netanyahu is out of Balfour Street, and Mahmoud Abbas is out of
In
authority.
Ramallah. Why do you think Mahmoud Abbas needs to be gone too?
Well, Mahmoud Abbas has no credibility whatsoever with his people. Now, he has no credibility for a variety of reasons. One of them, interestingly, is that he collaborates, in their view, every day with the Mossad and the Shin Bet to prevent terrorism in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu never gives him credit for that, disses him all the time, and yet on a daily basis, the Palestinian Authority is protecting Israelis. On the other hand, Bibi Netanyahu allows hundreds of millions of dollars into Gaza for Hamas, the
Yes.
entity that he keeps claiming we are supporting by criticizing him. But he's also criticized because there hasn't been an election there in now going on 19 years, because he's corrupt, because he's nepotistic, and because he has not let the youth, I call them youth, the 40-year-olds who are well educated, who are interested in a Palestinian state, have their voice heard there.
So you're saying he can't be trusted. So this new election, do you see him running again, or is he going to just drop out and let new people run? Because this is what a lot of the critics are saying: is you're going to give them Palestinian statehood based on this guy's word?
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen. I hope there will be elections. I hope he will not run. He probably won't run, but he will choose somebody that he hopes will win. I doubt that they will if there are free and fair elections. But let me just say one other thing. Israel has a peace treaty with Jordan. It has a peace treaty with Egypt. It has an Abraham Accords with 4 other countries. It wants to have a treaty, a deal with Saudi Arabia. None of them are liberal democratic countries. None of them have free and fair elections. So, having free and fair elections is important to us. And I think it's important writ large, universally. But let's not put demands on Palestine. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be the perfect Western state going forward. It has to be a state that wants to live in peace, in security with Israel. It will be demilitarized. And I think it can be governed by people who want to live in peace and stability beside Israel. This idea that the Israeli ambassador to Canada said on TV yesterday that no Palestinian has spoken in favor of two states. Yasser Arafat accepted two states with Clinton. Well, I heard Mahmoud Abbas at a Herzliya conference advocate for two states because he wanted his country to be a state. So there are many Palestinians, many moderate Palestinians who want two states just as much as Israel wants to be safe and secure in that region, which it deserves.
What is in it for Canada to do this?
I think after, and this is part of why all countries finally are doing this, what they have been seeing in Gaza and in the West Bank, frankly, and what they've been hearing by ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the dehumanization of Palestinians, the starving of Palestinian children, the denial that there is a humanitarian crisis by the Netanyahu government. Never mind the Gaza Ministry of Health in the face of tens of NGOs, of Canadian doctors on the ground, of the World Health Organization, in the face of it all, in the face of Donald Trump saying there is starvation.
There's lots of different views on media bias and the UN's agenda, which we don't have time to get into, but
I'm frankly tired of hearing about media bias. There
well,
is
the New York Times literally just apologized for using, the wrong picture. So there's a lot of distrust in all the sources from all sides.
there is a catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, and Jews around the world should stop trying to deny it.
I'm not trying to deny it. I'm just hearing.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about the prime minister. I'm talking about federation. I'm talking about people who want to pick a picture and say that that wasn't starvation when tens of organizations on the ground, Canadian doctors who
Right.
don't have a dog in this fight, are telling you there's a crisis.
Okay, let's talk about the second point I want to bring up, which is Hamas. The topic of Hamas was mentioned in Mr. Carney's press conference, but I wonder when we talk about the starvation and we talk about the bad actors in Gaza, do you think this is forgetting the agency, the role that Hamas has played?
Not at all.
Because that's a lot of the criticisms on the no side, which is, hey, this gave them a huge victory. I'm sure you've heard this in the last few hours.
First of all, Hamas is not interested in two states. They want a caliphate in the region. So pushing a two-state solution is actually completely contrary to their ideology and their wish.
Right.
Secondly, every time Israel is criticized, whether it's on an 11-week siege, whether it's on indiscriminate bombing, whether it's on talking about a humane concentration camp, every time it's criticized, it says two things. One, you're supporting Hamas, so don't criticize me. And two, you're contributing to anti-Semitism. My argument is that the problem with Hamas is that the people in Gaza don't support Hamas, or if they do, they support it ideologically. They are the ones suffering from Hamas. And why are they suffering? They're suffering because Hamas controls the Gaza Strip, or did, and they're suffering because Israel has dehumanized them and is still starving them. So I don't by any means think that Hamas doesn't deserve criticism. It is a terrorist organization, committed war crimes on October 7th. It continues to commit war crimes. It must be eliminated as a force. You can't eliminate it ideologically. But what I can do, and what I think Jews around the world who have a moral commitment to human rights, what they can do is say, in the process of defending yourself, Israel, in the process of responding to October 7, Israel, don't commit war crimes. Don't engage in a war that the United States told you 2 weeks after October 7. Don't do what we did in Iraq. Don't do what we did in Afghanistan. Don't alienate an entire civilian population in your effort to respond. Don't let revenge take over from good policy and from an effort to target the people you really want to get at.
Well, of course, it's easy to say because the Americans weren't fighting on their own soil. I mean, they were fighting overseas, and there were on 50 hostages still, or 200 at the time. I didn't get into this interview to have a debate about it with you. I wanted to explore these issues about for our listeners in terms of what's in it for Canada. They said they had a duty to do this. I'm as a diplomatic expert in global affairs. What is that duty that they had to do?
It's a moral duty on the part of Canada and the rest to finally speak up about what is happening in Gaza.
Thank you very much for being on this CJN's North Star podcast.
Thank you.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
And as promised, here's my conversation with former Ambassador Alan Kessel in Ottawa.
You've written a letter as part of a group of former ambassadors and people in global affairs explaining why Canada can't really technically give this recognition. Could you try to break it down for our listeners?
Well, it's very interesting that you talk about this because there's legal and there's political and there's policy. The legal world is always determined, and this is done by state practice, that there are certain elements that are required before you have the quality of a state. And that's usually a defined territory, a functioning government, a settled population, and essentially the capacity to conduct international relations. And that was put into the Montevideo Convention some years back.
1933, I think it is.
Yeah. And usually we stick with state practice, except when it's politically expedient not to stick with state practice. So there's the rule, and then there's the exception to the rule. There are, I understand, about 140-something states.
147 plus Canada, UK, and France. That'll be 150 out of 193 United Nations members who have recognized Palestine. Israel's 160-something. I'm just putting that out there, out of 193.
Most of those have also understand the Montevideo Convention, but most of them are, if not all of them, are making a political statement rather than a legal statement. So let's just take a look at it. Do they have a defined territory? No.
Pre-1967, pre-1948, now annexation. Right. Nobody really knows.
No, it's absolutely up in the air. It's disputed. Do they have a functioning government? Well, it's no, actually. So they have sort of a federation of Gaza and the West Bank, but they have Gaza, which is, essentially supposed to be part of this Palestinian territory, but has broken away from that territory.
Because Hamas took control in the elections in 2007, right?
Exactly. So they got this election, but then they immediately, got rid of Fatah, which is the overarching government. It's sort of like having a province, and the province decides it's going to, separate, and it did separate. And it basically became a terrorist state. Not to say that the West Bank isn't also a terrorist state. So just to say functioning government, even the West Bank is not a functioning government. So there you go, two parts of it. Do they have a settled population? Well, they would claim that they don't really themselves have a settled population because they believe their population is outside, inside, should be coming back, isn't coming back. According to UNRWA's definition of refugees, these people have been refugees for the past 80 years. So they're not settled. To conduct international relations, well, they do, in quotes, conduct international relations.
Yeah, they've got a mission in Ottawa. They've got representation at the United Nations, not voting, but observer status, right?
They do, and they're very influential, and they joined a number of treaties, for instance, the ICC treaty, the International Criminal Court Treaty. So they are recognized as a state. They're not a member of the United Nations. They're a quasi-member because In order to be a member of the United Nations, you need to have the Security Council agree to that, and they're not going to get Security Council agreement as long as the U.S. has a veto on the issue. So they're doing everything but, and even though Canada has made it very clear in the past, and whether this changes will be very interesting, whether Canada does not recognize them as a party to the ICC and has said in the past publicly and otherwise that because they're not a party, nothing that they do should impact on Canada. In the criminal court, it's individuals who are found criminally liable, and that's why the court has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant.
So will this mean if Canada recognizes Palestine, then they have to arrest them should they come here, which they're never going to? But
that's exactly the point. So the reality is that's changing now. If the government does decide to recognize a Palestinian state, it's going to have to do a whole bunch of things, including remove the status as a terrorist organization. Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Right, but the PA and just so explain, PA, PLO are not?
Well, they haven't designated the PA and the others as terrorist.
All right, so be clear. Because I'm not sure Gaza is going to be involved in this election. Do you know?
Which election?
The ones that are supposedly happening for the Palestinians in 2026. That's part of what Carney said yesterday.
Promised. Oh, by whom? By
Mahmoud Abbas on the phone.
Who is 90 years old in the 19th year of his 4-year mandate in the West Bank, and who has never been able to control Gaza, which is run by a terrorist organization. I mean, this sounds like an exam question that nobody could even answer. I don't know why Mr. Carney put himself in that difficult position. I'm sure his advisors must have told him that this is quicksand. The reality is there is no coherent Palestinian state. So I don't know what the government of Canada is going to be recognizing other than a concept of a future Palestinian state. 147 other countries have done it. So Canada's not leading on anything. You know, we're following. As it is, he's followed the French who indicated it, and he's followed the Brits who've indicated. So leadership is when you're in front and there are people behind you.
What prompted Carney to do this, do you think? Because in terms of your legal background, he said Canada has a duty.
Canada does have a duty. Canada has a duty to support liberal democratic states that are being attacked by terrorists. That's why Canada joined in helping against the Russians attacking Ukraine. We had basically a violent autocratic government called Russia attacking a democratic state called Ukraine. Canada is massively behind that and supporting, not only with weapons, but with support in law and other places. I mean, what kind of logic do we have which says that you actually support the perpetrators rather than the victims? And not only that, you recall that there were 24 Canadians that died in the Twin Towers.
On 9/11.
We joined Operation Enduring Freedom with the Americans and a coalition. We flew across the world. We spent 10 years fighting, bombing, killing, and destroying terrorists, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you name them, Taliban, in order to indicate that we were, part of a law-enforcing, human rights-abiding country that would not let terrorists run the world. And here we're now going to recognize basically a terrorist entity. I find this extraordinary that Canada would then grant political legitimacy even while hostages remain and terrorism continues. Where are our values? And then what does this mean for our relationship with Israel, the Canadian Jewish community? What does this do? What does it do for fueling and emboldening terrorism and escalating anti-Semitism in Canada? And what about the Jews that feel abandoned because their government appears to reward those who launched the October 7th attack that killed 7 Canadians? Mention the Canadians up front in your speech. Didn't even mention the names of the Canadians who were killed by these terrorists that he wants to recognize. So the bottom line, essentially, this is a symbolic gesture, but it has real political consequences.
Well, they're also giving them millions of dollars in the last 21 months, including now.
That's true. And what do you think they do with this money?
I'm asking you. Some people are saying that it's a reward for terrorists. But I'm wondering how that changed in 3 days, because a couple of days earlier this week at the ministers' meeting in New York, when Anita Nan said, "No, we're not going to recognize it now," and then whoosh, 3 days later they did. So do you know what went on? Is it the pictures of starving people that did it? Because how do you not look at those and feel your heart break?
I don't think anybody who sees pictures of the destruction of the civilian areas of Gaza could do anything but feel incredible pain. But the reality is that destruction was brought on by Hamas. They have 450 kilometers of tunnels, none of which is a bomb shelter for civilians. This is all really to keep their fighters safe. And with respect to those pictures, I think there was a recent retraction by the New York Times.
Yeah, one photo.
Well, one photo, but if you take a look at the many of the other photos, there are questions about who they are, what they are, and how they've been staged or not staged. The other reality is I don't see a lot of press coverage of the massive amount of food delivery that's just sitting there in Gaza waiting to be picked up by the United Nations, who don't want to do it because this would go counter to their story. They want to keep their story, which is that they've got this impoverished, hungry masses who are not being fed because of Israel. And that is bogus. The question to me is, why isn't the international press really reporting on that part?
No, I don't think they're allowed in to be. Israel doesn't let them in, so that's
Well, some of it Israel doesn't let them in,
Hamas doesn't either.
and other Hamas controls all of that stuff.
If the war ends quickly because of this pressure, will this make it better for Canadian Jews, do you think? And also for Palestinian Canadians and Arab Canadians who also said this week, we don't feel seen and heard in Canada.
If you were a Jew in Canada and looking out at television coverage, you're seeing a lot of Palestinian/Muslim Canadians being seen and heard. In fact, I was sitting at the keg in downtown Ottawa last Wednesday, and an impromptu demonstration went by, making a lot of noise and screaming "Free Palestine" right in front of those of us sitting on York Street. I think there's a question of Jews not being seen. And I think it's going to get even worse now that the government is emboldening those. I think the excuse that has now unleashed the new version of anti-Semitism for our time has been this issue in Gaza. The reality is anti-Semitism is as old as Jews. And the reality is that now there's been an emboldenment because we've seen every level of government not really reacting properly and not reacting with the force it needs to. When we had demonstrations in Toronto during the G20 summit, they had police on horses.
Mm-hmm.
They made it very clear, you do anything. When you're in downtown Toronto and people are blocking ambulances getting to hospitals, I think that's a lack of leadership. So if Mr. Carney thinks he's doing leadership, if Mayor Chow thinks she's leading, they should ask people who are looking at them for leadership. They are not leading. And I don't know how you turn back the clock and everybody's going to go and be happy little Canadians going off to the mall on a Saturday. Quite frankly, I think it's changed the very nature of Canadian society and not for the good.
In the UK, you watched the UK Prime Minister say, we'll recognize you if in the next few weeks you do X, Y, and Z, all on Israel. Whereas, do you think what Canada did, which was put it mostly on the Palestinians, is a carrot? Like the two different approaches, can you sort of contrast them for me?
So my basic view is that you recognize a state because it meets the capacity to be a state. You don't say to Israel, I'll create a state that is actually a terrorist organization if you don't do the following X, Y, and Z. So I think Keir Starmer was so out of line. He'll be written up in history as someone who missed the boat. I think Carney was a little bit more cagey on this. He obviously saw what Starmer did and the response, and he couched it in a different way. Whether the end result will be different, I don't really think so. So he's also saying a bit to the Palestinians, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, that would also include, getting rid of pay for slay, because every time you give the Palestinian Authority money, it boosts their budgets to be able to pay as they have indicated they would.
But didn't he also say recently, Mahmoud Abbas, that that's over now?
He says it in English, and that's what the Western world wants to hear. But the reality is They have other means to go and pay these folks for pay for slay. I don't think that the Palestinians will be able to live up to those expectations, but that will not stop our government from fulfilling their promise. They will find a way to rationalize whatever the Palestinians do as meeting the Canadian standards. I would hope that Canada would recognize Taiwan as a state rather than a terrorist entity. That would actually be a state. They meet all the requirements, and they are a massive colleague and friend to us, and they're actually productive, and they don't need our money to function. So, when you're looking at Canadian interests here, let's go for a second. What are in Canadian interests to be doing what we're doing right now? And I don't see anything. Canada is irrelevant in the peace process. And the only good thing about what Canada is doing is that it's irrelevant.
Interesting take on that. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks a lot for sharing your interpretations of this big news in Canada on the Canadian Jewish News' North Star podcast.
It's always a pleasure, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. We'd love to hear from you on this issue. Write to us at info@thecjn.ca. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back after the August holiday long weekend.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.